Hey guys, this is another Q&A, and I haven't made a Q&A since like the beginning of the year when I didn't have very many subscribers. And so a lot of people didn't realize that that was the first time I did a face reveal on the channel. So a lot of people thought that the competition in June, a lot of people thought that that was the first time my face was on the channel. And Crazy Bad Cuber had a vlog of that competition, and I was in that video, and then people also thought that was the first time I revealed my face. So no, it goes back to when I made this video about color neutrality and I was wearing like a green jacket. Okay, anyway, let's get into the Q&A. So Yannick Peter asked, how did you get into cubing? So I think my story is really similar to a lot of people. So I got a Rubik's Cube for Christmas because my dad thought I'd just be the type of person to enjoy that sort of thing. And then I did. We tried to figure it out a bit, and all I could figure out was like one layer. I figured out that you don't make one side, you have to make one layer, but then I couldn't figure out how to make the second layer. Now, given enough time, I think I could have figured that out. I ended up watching a tutorial on YouTube for how to solve the whole thing, and I was really excited when I could do it, so I just went faster and faster, and that's where like my story is the same as everybody else's. What is your favorite hobby next to cubing? Okay, so I play tennis. I used to play a lot of tournaments, and I don't play that much anymore, but it's super fun, and I'm still on my school team. Suzanne Tyler asks, are you left-handed? Actually, I'm not left-handed. I write with my right hand, and you would have noticed in my competition videos, because I sign everything with my right hand, the reason I do all my cubing stuff lefty is because I realized I was faster at using my left hand. So I started off using both hands because I felt like that was better. But once I realized that that wasn't better because I was regripping a lot to be able to use both of them, then I just chose whichever hand I was faster with. Grubix asks, if CFOP and RU were never invented, what method would you use? So I think the answer is kind of obvious because there is basically only one method that speed solving wise can even compare to these two. And that is obviously ZZ. But I personally don't really like the R2s and L2s of ZZ. And one thing I really like about CFOP is that since you have to preserve your cross pieces, basically every time you do R, you have to do an R prime at the end. So in terms of regrips, that basically means there's not a lot of regrips. But then for ZZ, that's not the same because if you do an R, you may do an R again later, or you might be using R2s and stuff. So I feel like even though there's no rotations for ZZ, there is more regrips when you're not rotating. So that's one thing I really like about CFOP. So if I realize that while using ZZ as my main, I might actually switch to ZZ Cross, which I do think is really nice because it feels a lot like CFOP, but then recognition is easier and obviously you don't have to rotate. And if you don't know what ZZ Cross is, it's just you do ZZ, but instead of making like the EO line, which is one line of the front and back edge at the bottom, you make the whole cross. And it's funny that you ask that because in my PB single, which is 5.49, I'll put a reconstruction to it in the description. And the reason the reconstruction is interesting is because after I made the cross, then actually all of the edges were oriented. So technically for my PB single, I did ZZ Cross. So like my best single ever was with ZZ. Like I did use CFOP, but if you told someone it was ZZ, they can't really argue that, yeah, it was ZZ. PJ Davis asks, what is your worst or most embarrassing cubing experience? So actually one thing that happened in my very first competition, I think I averaged about 13 or so during that competition. And I think the cube I was using was like a Diane Zanchi, and I didn't have torpedoes in it, which means it pops a lot. So the only time that it popped in competition that day was during finals in my very last solve, and that ended up being the very last solve of the day of anyone. So that means everyone was watching. I don't think I was nervous, that's not what made it pop, it's just the fact that it's a Zanchi. So an edge popped, and then my friend who's there with me didn't know the rules, it was also his first comp, and then he just picked it up and handed it to me. I'm like, thanks dude. So then I put it back in and I ended up solving the cube in 59 seconds. And I'm like, yes, under a minute. Of course, some people laughed. And then I look at the score sheet and they gave me a DNF. So ever since that competition, I don't know if it's because of my specific incident. At the beginning of every Vancouver comp I've been to since then, the rule explanation always includes if someone's piece pops, don't pick it up for them or it'll be a DNF. The first time I heard that at my second competition, I was like, yeah, that's because of me probably. Gotham B asks, are you planning on vlogging in your next competition videos in the future? Why or why not? So probably not because I don't feel like I'm much of a vloggy person. So yeah, I also try to focus more on the competition rather than like of the videos I'm making. Chocolate Chip Cuber asks, will you make some videos about predicting OLL from last slot or predicting PLL from OLL? So to be honest, I'm not very good at predicting OLL from last slot. If I do try to work on it more, which I have a little bit in the past, then I will make a video on like what techniques I do and what I look out for. And then for predicting PLL from OLL, I don't have a video on like completely all the techniques that I know about and try to use, but I do have one which is about predicting where your headlights are going to be. So what I mean by headlights is like, for example, this is a G Perm and these two colors are the same and the other corner sticker pairs are not the same color, so these are the headlights. And generally, for most of your PLLs, you'll have headlights on the same side. So if you know which side the headlights will show up on after OLL, then you can immediately align the top layer to make it easier to recognize PLL. So if you want to see the video for that, by the way, it's really advanced. The link is in the description. And which is more useful, ZBLL or VLS? So let's first talk about full ZBLL versus full VLS. So ZBLL has about 400 something algorithms, meanwhile VLS has about 200. Now VLS only shows up when you have the type of pair to insert that's like this, where they're paired up, not the type where there's one here and one here. So you might think that's on half of your solves, but there are some cases you can influence to make it have a paired up case rather than a split case. So I want to say like maybe 3/4 of solves, maybe a little bit less, you can get a VLS case. And for ZBLL, it will be 1 in 8 solves, which is far less, unless you do edge control, but that's not really going to raise the number by that much. So VLS shows up more often, and there are fewer algorithms. So you might say it's better because of that, but it's actually not necessarily the case, because VLS doesn't help you skip OLL, it helps you do an algorithm that's shorter than OLL. So technically VLS saves you, can't remember exactly how many moves, but let's just say it saves you like around 5 moves. ZBLL has about the same move count as PLL. So I think it actually saves you like 9 moves or something. This is just like approximate math, but basically the idea is that VLS shows up more often, VLS has fewer algorithms, but it does not help you as much per each time that you get the case. So ZBL is super useful when you get it, but it rarely ever shows up. So I just want to say that both are really useful and you should try to learn all of the best cases from both of them if you're trying to be really serious about optimizing this. Like, it's not super useful to know either of them, but if you do want to have that extra edge in your solves, then try to just learn the best cases from both of them. If you know full VLS versus you know full ZBLL, I don't think there's like a huge difference in which one's better. But if you know all the good cases in each of them, that's far fewer algorithms for a much greater reward. So that's what I think is the best. Cedric asks, what is your main cube and why? So right now I'm using the Cosmic Volk M. So from Speedcube Shop, I was using the GTS2M. I started trying to use my Volk again, which I had as my main before the GTS2M. And I thought, wow, this is really good. It's like basically comparable to my GTS2M and it's not even magnetic. So why don't I just try getting a magnetic Volk? And turns out I do like it better. But I think my preference shifts over time. Like, it depends. My theory is that when you use different cubes, you develop different habits based on what the cube can tolerate. And if you get really used to one cube, you might start liking other cubes better because the habits you have developed translate better onto certain other cubes. That may not be true, but that's just what I feel. FastCube Master asks, do you think learning ufvls is worth it? So for you guys watching, in case you don't know what this means, that means that it's the VLS cases where when you have the pair over here touching the same color here, then the UF edge is flipped. So the reason this is the sledgehammer type case is because if you do a sledgehammer, which is R prime, F, R, F prime, then it orients all the edges. So I think these cases are particularly nice, but then the reason that I don't think it's necessary to learn all of them is because often sledgehammer to ZBLL will be faster. So if you're just trying to optimize all the things you're doing, then I feel like learning a bunch of easy ZBLLs and also just doing sledgehammer to COLL or sledgehammer to ZBLL may be faster than doing VLS for some of them. But I feel like maybe like half or 1/3 of those cases are actually really worth learning. It's not like you should learn all of them for any specific subset unless you're trying to learn full VLS and use it in all of your solves, in which case, of course, just learn the full subset. But if you're just trying to pick which ones are worth it, I think out of the UF ones, just pick the ones that are easy to recognize and easy to execute, and then just sledgehammer the rest of them. But also, yeah, I do think this is probably one of the best VLS subsets after Winter Variation. Zhang Yi Ho asks, do you have the feeling that when you play a mini cube for a few days and when you get back to your normal cube, it feels weird? Yes, actually, and even if I just use a mini cube for like an hour, or even just like an extended number of minutes. So my main cube used to be a mini Oolong. All right, so here's the mini Oolong. Yes, I used to use white cubes. And if you see some of my really, really early videos, I only had a Weilong GTS plus some other white cubes. So if you're wondering about the stickers chipped a lot and I took them off, ready to resticker them, but then I got a new main, so I never restickered it. Okay, there we go. So now it's aligned. And yeah, it's like very, very slightly smaller. So in terms of comparing it to my Volk, it's not very different. But before, when I used to use the Weilong GTS, which is like even like barely even bigger than the Volk, like a 0.5 millimeter or 1.5 millimeters makes a huge difference. I feel like it's slightly easier to turn on a smaller cube because your fingers cover less distance, but then it doesn't actually really make a difference. It just feels that way. So when I get onto bigger cubes, then my finger having to travel more distance to complete a turn makes me feel like I'm going slower, but it's just me not being used to the cube. Various people have asked me how much time did it take you to get from sub something to sub something else, like sub 20 to sub 15 or so on. So I'm going to give a general breakdown of how long it took me to get from whatever to whatever. So I used the beginner method for a few years before I even knew what F2L was, and that's like when I didn't take it that seriously. So when I actually decided to learn F2L, I'm going to start it all from there. So when I first learned the basic concept of F2L and I could do it in my solves, I averaged about 30 to 45 seconds. And then I think to get to sub 20, it was definitely under 6 months. So I never actually recorded like at what time I averaged what, but I do have my PB singles because that's the only thing I cared about way back then, because I could break my PB single record all the time. So my first ever sub 20 single was in March of 2012, and my first ever sub 10 single was in September of 2012. So it took me 6 months to have a sub 20 single going to a sub 10 single. So in terms of average, I think that means I went from high 20 to mid 10s, like around 15, 16 average. So I think a full year after learning F2L, I was averaging about 13 seconds. And then the total amount of time it took me to practice going from sub 13 to like sub 10 was probably about a year and a half to 2 years. So basically in total, I've been cubing for like at least 5 years now, but the total time that I actually spent practicing ever since I learned F2L was about 2.5 years. Roblox Killer says, name 3 things to get sub 40 OH. Okay, so for one-handed solving, I think the number one most important thing to be able to approach anywhere near what you average on 2 hands is to be able to turn faster. So by being able to turn fast, I don't mean spamming TPS during your solves. I mean just be so comfortable with turning OH that you don't have to think about it much and that you can like just do turns quickly. And yeah, I feel like a lot of people get to a certain point and they feel like they can't improve when really it's just your muscles haven't gotten good enough yet to be able to turn that fast. 2 more things to get sub 40 on OH. I'm going to say learn the OH PLL or OLL algorithms, at least change some of the ones that are really bad from 2 hands. And also find cross solutions that don't require a lot of rotations, even if it means doing more moves, because moves are faster than rotations for one hand. The Cubing Guide asks, are you in Canada? Yes, I'm in Vancouver. Kai Staunton asks, what do you think will be the boundary or limit of 3x3 world record solves? As in, what will the lowest time be that a human can achieve at a competition? Is JPerm your favorite algorithm, hence the name JPerm? Yes. And for the boundary or limit of 3x3 world record solves, I don't think it's that hard to work out. You just have to say like, okay, so it's a world record solve, right? It's not your average solve, so the TPS should be really good. So let's just say anywhere from like 10 to 15 TPS, right? So if you use that, then say the solution, I'm not going to say realistically we'll have a 20 move speed solve solution in competition. I mean, it could happen, but I don't really want to say that's going to happen anytime soon. So let's just go with like 30 moves. So 30 moves at 10 to 15 TPS would be 2 to 3 seconds. I don't mean like sub 4 or sub 3. I mean literally 2.00 to 3.00 seconds. And I really don't think that the 3x3 world record single will ever be sub 2. And that's because if you just work out the TPS and the number of moves, that's just so unlikely. Like it could happen if we keep going for like centuries, but you know, it's probably not going to happen that you're ever going to see. And I'm talking like world record level TPS on a solve that's like 20 something moves. You have to not only get that, but you have to be one of the best cubers in the world, and you also have to be at your maximum TPS at that moment. That's why I think sub 2 is like possible, but it's totally not plausible that we're going to see that. By the way, the reason I'm not taking other methods into account other than CFOP, number one reason is because CFOP is like the most popular method among the top speed cubers right now and holds all the world records. But the other reason is because even though Rue is really good and it has a lower move count, you can't really say that your maximum turn speed on Rue can be as good as CFOP, since CFOP has like RUF algorithm span like JPerms, and Rue uses MU, and there's no way you can do 13 MU moves as fast as you can do a JPerm. So that's why I'm using CFOP for my calculations, but it should translate roughly to be about the same for Rue. You'll have a lower TPS but fewer moves. And then for average, I'm just going to think about like if you had a 4.00 second average, then that would be like 40 moves at 10 TPS or like 50 moves at like 12.5 TPS. You know what? 50 moves at 12.5 TPS isn't like that out of the question, but that's the thing. Like if something seems hard, that's not really a good enough reason why it should be impossible. So I want to say like low 4 average, maybe. Yeah, I'm not really good at predicting the average thing because there's less math involved and more like practicality involved. So I'm just going to give my answer of low 4 average is the world record average limit, unless we come up with a better method. Gabriel asks, I average like 50 seconds and I'm thinking of buying a new cube. Do you think it is better to buy a good cube first and start to learn some algorithms, or wait until I dominate Friedrich? Or in other words, wait until I learn more things from CFOP. So it depends on what you mean by good cube. Yes, you should definitely buy a good cube if the good cube means a speed cube. Basically any speed cube. You can get under $5 decent speed cubes, which are called budget cubes. Like right now, the best one is like MF3RS, and I think it's about $5. So the reason for that is so that you can learn good finger tricks. So if you spend a lot of money on a really good speed cube right now, then when a better one comes out, you could have spent it on that and instead have a budget cube right now. So there are good reasons to spend a lot of money on a cube, like you want to know the feeling of it, or you just really want the cube. Like there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're just looking for the optimal steps to improvement, then you don't really need a great cube until you're like, until you feel like your current cube is holding you back because of too many lockups or not enough speed, or so on. So at that point, maybe I want to say like sub 15 or something. Of course, you can go further, like wait till sub 10 before ditching your budget cube. But I'm just speaking practically, like there's no way you're going to be using a budget cube for that long. You want to get a better cube at some point, which is why I say sub 15, maybe sub 20. You want to start experimenting with different cubes. Rahul asks, if I am sub 17 with 2-look OLL, is it worth learning other variations for the last layer, like 1-look OLL, COLL, OLL CP, or shall I focus more on getting faster at F2L? I think your focus, no matter how fast you are, should always be getting faster at F2L. If you focus more on other things, by the time you reach a certain level where you're plateauing because your F2L isn't good enough, you're going to have to go back to F2L anyway. I think that all the other algorithm sets, even if it's a pretty necessary one like full PLL or full OLL, I think those ones should be worked on at the same time, but slowly with your F2L. So always be working on F2L algorithms or look ahead or something like that, and just have your algorithms as like a side thing that you work on slowly. So for example, if you spend an entire month just working on an algorithm set and you completely don't work on F2L, that'll end up catching up with you because no matter how good you get at that algorithm set, your solves will mostly be limited by how fast you can do F2L. Vinsu asks, how do you practice OH? So I mostly just do a lot of turns. So if I have a cube near me and I just happen to feel like doing some OH turns, then I'll do like some algorithms. And I'll just try to do it as fast as I can over and over because it's really, really important to get a lot of turning practice for OH compared to two hands because your muscles need to like do more things basically than for two hands. So you can just spam algorithms a lot, whichever ones you think are fun or whichever ones you're trying to work on. That's one way to practice. Then the other thing, of course, is just the same as two hands, it's just doing a lot of solves. So RUL is good for OH and so is RUD algorithms, and I get all of those from algdb.net or just by looking on YouTube for other people's algorithms. David asks, are you going to do a how to become sub 10? Yes, I will eventually, and the quick version of how to be sub 10 is practice look ahead. On my winter variation video, Potato Royale asks, how do I set up this to practice my winter variation? Okay, so how to set up COLL, winter variation, ZBLL. I'll put some links in the description for how I like to practice, but I'll just show you an example here of what I do for practicing winter variation. So what you can do, I don't know if this is also on CS Timer, but I know this is on QQ Timer. You can go into the options and select last lot plus last layer. Now, if you do this, you won't necessarily get all your edges oriented. So instead, what you can do is go to ZZ last lot plus last layer, and then that will give you your edges oriented and you can practice winter variation like that. Kuberius asks, how did you get sponsored by SpeedCube Shop for making tutorials? So normally you think of somebody who gets sponsored as someone who's either really fast or makes a lot of cube reviews and unboxings. So I don't make a lot of those because I personally never bought that many cubes. But then when I do buy a cube, I usually have a pretty good reason and I'm trying to like get a new main and talk about its feeling and all that. So I feel like it's really important to be comfortable in what cube you're using. And I've reflected that sometimes by like some unboxings I have where I just pick like a few important cubes that I want to buy and I just show like, hey, these are the ones I'm getting, you guys should get it too. And that's because I really believe that and those are becoming my new mains. So like my channel is not all about tutorials, remember it is about improvement. So being confident in the cube that you're using is really important for improvement. So there are a few reasons why that's important. It's not just because certain cubes make you faster, that's not it. The reason is because of confidence. Being confident is really important for competition. And another reason is fun. So I didn't have that much fun practicing 4x4 until I got my Wu Trui M, Well, the Wu Tray itself was already pretty good, but then the Wu Tray M was super fun to practice on, and I immediately like cut down 3 seconds on my average just because I was like, wow, this is so fun to practice on. So I kind of got off topic. So the reason I'm able to be sponsored, even though I'm not focused on the products, like with reviews and unboxings, is because the most important thing is your audience. So for those of you guys wanting to get sponsored, remember, it's more important that you have an outreach to more people rather than your videos are just about all these products, because if no one's watching them, then it doesn't really matter. And it's also not about the number of subscribers, it's about who watches and who trusts you. So that's why I've always tried to be really honest with my reviews. Just because I'm reviewing a certain cube, like I reviewed the mass-produced Valk M, I really didn't think it was much of an improvement or an improvement at all over the Valk. It's basically just a heavier Valk where you can tell there's magnets when you turn really slowly, but when you turn fast, you can't tell at all. So in that video, I made sure to specifically at the end not recommend it and then recommend some other things instead. You're watching the video, you want to get something out of it. So I recommended some cubes I think that people might like if they're considering the mass-produced Valk M. But then for like my Wu Tray video, the Wu Tray M, I said, this is really good. And if you have the money and you want the best 4x4, then you should definitely buy it. So yeah, for all of you guys wondering how to get sponsored, you just need to make videos that you think are really good that people will watch. And the larger your audience and the more your audience trusts you, the more likely you'll be able to get sponsored. All right, so that's it for this video. And let me know if you guys like to see more videos like this. See you all next time.